When my wife's mother died a few weeks ago, we received a few condolence cards. Very nice thought. Laura. And one of those cards had a little poem on it called "The Rose Beyond the Wall," which I'd never come across before. I've since discovered that it's a very popular poem and condolence cards. What I found interesting about, I'll just explain what that poem was. I can't really remember it in detail, but the sentiment was it kind of invoked an allegory to do with a separation between the state of life and the state of death, and these states being separated by a wall, and something beautiful that had been growing on this side of the wall, where it's part of our lived experience, a rose, had now moved behind the wall and into this place where death exists, and is now blooming behind the wall, or beyond the wall. So we're invited to be consoled by that, I think, in that the person who we cared about still exists in some metaphorical sense or metaphysical sense. They're just beyond, they're just outside of this region of lived experience. The allegory of the wall, I think, is really important on that. Because walls have certain features. They're, for the most part, opaque. They're impenetrable. You can't see through them. You can't usually easily climb over them. If you do climb over them, it's almost impossible to climb back a lot of the time. They separate very different states. They're put there for a purpose, to separate different states. That kind of a situation is what it is, really. But what I'm thinking about in relation to that is how that allegory of space, separated by the division of a wall, plays itself out. And what I'm reminded of with that, I'm just going to put this alongside the Rose Behind the Wall poem, is boundary maths. Particularly what I'm thinking of is the boundary maths that George Spencer Brown called primary algebra, and which he wrote about in his fantastic book called The Laws of Form. And in that book, it's basically it's a maths book, but it deals with almost the philosophy of maths, really, or it starts from quite a primal position in relation to mathematics. And it develops a theory of number, a theory of sets, a theory of mathematical processes based on the idea of distinction. So I think one of the first lines in this book is something like, "Let there be a form distinct from the form." So we're invited to imagine a kind of empty space, like a blank sheet of paper, and then you draw a circle on that sheet of paper, what Spencer Brown refers to as a mark, and the circle, the area inside the circle, is distinct from the area outside the circle. Before the mark was drawn, there was no distinction, but after the mark is drawn, there is a distinction, and the boundary of the circle, the wall around the circle, effectively, is the mark of distinction between the inside and the outside, between one space and another space, and then a series of mathematical propositions emerge from that. So, for example, I think one thing he says is that the value of a distinction is the value of the crossing of the mark. So the value of the area inside the circle in numerical terms is the value of effectively 1 when you cross from the outside of the circle to the inside of the circle. So the value of the crossing. And then there's a whole range of other mathematical propositions, as I say. But why I'm pointing that out is because it seems to me that exactly the same allegory, the same metaphor, the same kind of embodied experience is being invoked in Spencer Brown's Laws of Form, in the primary algebra there, as there is in the poem The Rose Behind the Wall. The Rose Beyond the Wall, I'm sorry. There's this same sense that here's a boundary, a distinction, a wall. It's difficult to get over or through, and that difficulty is represented in Spencer Brown as value. Once you're through, you can't simply be back. You have to travel back, and the travelling back has its own value, which may be very difficult indeed, or very high value. In a sense, it's insurmountable. In a sense, it's impenetrable and opaque. And I'm not saying there's a mathematics of mortality, but I think there's some. The fact is that the same kinds of metaphorical extensions, metaphorical inferences are being drawn across both. I think two things for me come out of that. The first is that metaphor of death being as two spaces separated by a wall is not one I find helpful. All that does for me, at least, is kind of present a whole series of problems, insurmountable problems, inadequacies, hopes for consolation which can be unrealized because you've kind of placed those beyond the boundary. So I just don't find that metaphor of the wall or the other side or going beyond or any of those kind of metaphors to do with spatial metaphors to do with death, going away, helpful at all. And the second thing is just to do with the fact that those two systems, the death allegory and and primary algebra, the fact that they do draw upon the same embodied experiences. And I know this is something that Raphael Nunez and George Lakoff talk about in Where Mathematics Comes From. That these things are ultimately derived from, not from experiences of dying, and not from experiences of doing mathematics, but from experiences of living, of being confronted by walls, of being confronted by boundaries, of putting things in containers and seeing how difficult it is. Not how difficult it is, but seeing what the implications are for putting things in containers and taking things out of containers, and the whole kind of logic which falls out of those kind of completely experiential, concrete activities that we engage in and that we are kind of bound to by the nature of our embodiment and the environment that we're embedded within. So even though allegories of death and dying and the abstractions of primary algebra seem very different, for me they both touch down in the same concrete experiences of embodied being.